Is this typical Steelers-Bengals game, or was it a little more vicious?
It's typical. You know, those guys came out with a lot of emotion. We didn't blink, panic, get distracted. We fought hard to the end. It wasn't pretty. We really liked it.
Yeah, it's a good.
Got
I was thinking Juju's block.
I like that.
I'll tell you, the body count was high on Monday night, a stark reminder of just how violent the game of football can be, especially when you have division rivals squaring off in a pivotal game late in the season. Now, Robin, many people were outraged over the amount of violent hits, including Hall of Famer Troy Aikman, who tweeted this during the game. He said, "This game is hard to watch for a number of reasons. Terrible for the NFL and the game of football overall." Robin, if the game is so hard to watch, why do we keep watching?
Speaking personally, it's starting to become a professional responsibility, the reason that I'm watching. I referred to football as a guilty pleasure earlier in the year, not in the traditional sense, because I don't believe in those kind of guilty pleasures. I like the movie 13 going on 30, and I'll say it.
Okay,
but in
True confessions.
A guilty pleasure in the sense where I feel guilty watching it, knowing what we know right now. And I don't say this as somebody with an axe to grind. I remember playing fantasy football when you had to tabulate the score from the newspaper on paper by hand. But you see some of this stuff and you're just, it's a visceral reaction. You watch and you wonder, why am I continuing to support this when I know the ramifications it can have on the human body and the participants?
Well, of course, we know so much now. It's hard to watch this and not be attached to it in a different way, especially with social media. We feel like we know the athletes better, perhaps, than we ever did. They're not these faceless, sort of anonymous kind of guys. We feel like we know them, but, you know, I think that might be maybe people in the media, maybe it's people who are really paying attention. I'm not sure if fans out there who just use football as an escape, as that guilty pleasure, as a way to sort of tune out and just something they really love, I don't know if they're really all that bothered by the amount of violence in the game, especially a game like this. Now, why I kept watching is not just because it's my job, but let's be honest, this was a great game. You have division rivals. There's a lot on the line. You had the Steelers down by 17, right, at the half. They're down 17-0 at one point in the first half. Cincinnati kicked a field goal to get off the schneid right before halftime. But then you have a comeback on the road in the driving rain. We know the teams don't like each other. I cannot be naive to the fact that there is a certain amount of bloodlust that goes back to like the Romans in the Colosseum. Now, we've changed things, and it's going to take a long time to totally get rid of that if it ever does. But I understand why people keep watching, especially a game like this. We kill the NFL when the games are boring. This was an actual game that you were riveted from beginning to end.
Yeah, there's a fine line between hard-hitting football and when the guys don't get up, and there's really no way for us to identify what that line is. I think the problem this year is multifaceted. You know, I believe when we look back, we could see 2017 as sort of the beginning of the end for the NFL and its dominance, because from the macro perspective, the nature of the game has always been the biggest threat to the sport.
Right.
But on the micro perspective, there have been a lot of other things that have maybe created a negative perception for the NFL this year. So that macro aspect, the danger of the sport, can stand out more when people aren't as exhilarated and don't feel as good about the day-to-day action, the week-to-week action.
Okay, here's what you guys are saying out there on Facebook Live, also on Periscope. Please keep the comments coming. Mike says, I used to watch every Sunday, not anymore. Sports overall ain't what it used to be. Rob, basically going with what you said, Robin, taking it a little further. He said the NFL will be extinct in 20 to 25 years. And Vince says, I love football and the Warriors that decide to play it. Listen, can we talk about both sides of our mouth here? Yeah, you want things to be, you know, physical without being this brutal, but can you really have it both ways? I don't think you can.
No, I don't think you can. It's like, you know, they keep trying to make the game safer, they say. Safety belts make car crashes safer. There's still car crashes.
Sure.
It's still a dangerous activity. Now, these guys know what they're doing, and the more and more that comes out, they know the ramifications that could come from it. So perhaps you take that and you say, all right, yeah, I may not be thrilled about what could happen, but these guys know what they're signing up for. But then there's also the look inside and the personal moral dilemma where just because these guys know what they're doing doesn't mean I have to actively support it.
Yeah, that's really true. Carolyn says, what's up with last night's game of foot brawl? Shame on both teams. That was a disgrace. And of course, Rick, this is something that you and I have talked about many times here on the show. when they can detect CTE in living players, the NFL is done. And that really goes back to what you're talking about. Inherently, the game is not safe. Now we know more about the physical risks, and if they do have a test for CTE in the living, which is starting to hear whispers and rumors and certain places that are trying to work on these kinds of tests, what would the impact be?
Well, you think about how quickly this conversation has accelerated, right? I mean, the idea of the NFL being in any danger was laughable a few years ago. I used to say it was the single most popular thing in this country. It may still be, but now you are starting to hear more and more of this conversation. You see people who cover the NFL for a living talking about it, and it's difficult to accept because it's been such a part of our lives for so long. But I always reference, horse racing and boxing used to be the top sports. You used to be able to smoke on a plane. So just because something is doesn't mean it always will be.
Keep the comments coming. Colin says, no, we need more of this. Football's too soft. Both sides to everything. Meanwhile, let's go inside the game. One of the biggest hits came late in the fourth quarter. Juju Smith-Schuster laid out Vontaze Burfict. 2 flags on the play. Unnecessary roughness and taunting after Smith-Schuster stood over Burfict. Now, the Bengals linebacker carted off the field, but reportedly walked into the locker room on his own from the tunnel, so that's good. Here was the scene in the Steelers locker room after the game.
Karma.
That's not me.
It's called karma.
I apologize for that. And
It's called karma.
with that being said,
It's called karma.
Are you a little more of a believer in karma now than
Karma. Karma.
You talking about Burfict leaving with the head injury?
I ain't talking about nobody. Karma is karma. Karma is just in life. You do the wrong things, you get the wrong things happening. It's not personal between no one.
Okay, so obviously a lot of karma being injected into the conversation, and that's for Antonio Brown when Vontaze Burfict in a wild card game laid him out. Brown missed the next game against the New England Patriots, could not play in that game. Steelers were eliminated. Robin, what do you make of the idea of karma, and also should Juju Smith-Schuster be suspended because of the hit on Vontaze Burfict?
I mean, the idea of karma in this case, I get it. I mean, I'm not naive as to why people would think this guy had it coming. I don't wish injury or ill will on anyone, and I think that would hopefully lead to good karma, right? Wishing the best for others. As far as Juju here, this is really tough, and this is where I feel for the players, because it is a very, very fine line between a legal hit and an illegal hit, and intent is so hard to measure in that case because these guys are taught to play till the whistle blows. They have to hit guys hard to bring them down. We've celebrated hard-hitting, smash-mouth, blocking football when you're not even involved in the play. So to come in and maybe have some helmet-to-helmet contact or lead with your shoulder into another guy's helmet, that may happen just as part of the natural action on the field and may not be deliberate. So when the suspension talk comes up, it's difficult for me to assess it in this case because I can watch it and believe his side of the story where he didn't even know who he was going after. He was just trying to help his team.
I think this reminds me of the Danny Trevathan hit on Devontae Adams that we saw earlier this year. It was a hit that happened while play was going on. This was not a Michael Crabtree, Aqib Talib kind of thing. This is even not Mike Evans, Marshawn Lattimore. This is not Rob Gronkowski. This happened in the game, on the field, and Danny Trevathan got 1 game. This is, I think, going to be the standard for players who have no history and for players where the tackle or the hit in question happens on the field and is like a reasonable football play. It's not something that's completely out of the realm. So I think that Juju Smith-Schuster will get 1 game for this particular infraction. Now, when it comes to karma, I mean, listen, I understand what people are saying about Vontaze Burfict. I mean, he's been fined over $300,000. He has this bad reputation. Should that be a reason to lay somebody out? Absolutely not. But when we talk about potentially players policing themselves, maybe you're seeing, that guys around the league are going to say, Vontaze Burfict has been doing this to people all throughout his career. Maybe it's about time that we send a message to him on the field that we're not going to let this fly anymore. Now, if I were really the Bengals, this is what I would honestly be worried about. Since 2003, they are 2-15. The Steelers are 15-2 against their division rival. That's appalling if you are Cincinnati. You have to do everything you possibly can to try to rectify that because you are not competitive with the Bengals at this point. And you had a lead, a 17-point lead at home in this game on Monday night. And yet again, the Bengals could not perform in prime time. And yet again, they come away losers here. I would be more worried about that if I'm Cincinnati than anything that has to do with karma or what have you.
Can it really be a rivalry if one team is winning every time?
Yeah. All right, let's go back to more comments. You guys are fired up today. So are we. We appreciate you, of course, weighing in. How about this from the big Riga? Burfict had it coming. Hashtag Team Juju. Let's go to Lamont, who says Juju should not be suspended. The shot was clean. It wasn't. He was flagged for on the play, but we can understand how that is a little bit of a bang-bang play.
Yeah, I mean, it's an impossible standard. How do you tell a guy who's coming at full speed, trying to bring down, a huge person in live action without the benefit of replay, without, being able to assess his actions in the midst of doing them, when a little bit of your head tilt here can be the difference between it being legal versus illegal.
I mean, it was a shot, though. How about this from Max? Regardless of Burfict's past, headshots should not be allowed in the league. CTE comes from brutal headshots like that. Well, CTE comes from brutal headshots. It comes from repetitive headshots. It comes from a lot of different places. I mean, there's still a lot of studies being done about that. But I think that Max has the right idea here. Regardless of the past, right? We should be trying to eliminate these kinds of plays. It doesn't matter who gets hit. We should be trying to eliminate these kinds of things.
If last night's game was less eventful, Rob Gronkowski being suspended one game for his late hit on the Bills' Tre'Davious White might be a bigger story. But in light of the tone of last night's game, does the suspension feel light?
No, it doesn't to me, because I go back to that like Mike Evans on the Marshawn Lattimore. And when it's a guy with no history of doing dirty things on the field, and it happens even after the play is done, like that Mike Evans Lattimore hit, I think that it's going to be one game. Like I said, I think this is the standard now for guys who have no violent history. So I don't think that it looks too light on Gronkowski. If we want to say all of it is too light, well, that's another conversation. Specifically for Gronkowski, it seems like it's in line with what the league has been giving out all season long.
See, I think it was too light, and my position here is it's very different from the Juju Smith-Schuster hit, because this, you can see what's going on. In his case, you can argue he was just trying to make a play. Gronkowski was doing this after the play.
Yeah,
the player
like
was
Evans on Lattimore.
The player was defenseless. He's driving his arm into the back of his head. That can cause serious damage. We know he had to enter the concussion protocol. And if I'm using their standards, usually the suspensions can come down a game. We saw that happen with Crabtree and Talib, but that suspension started with 2 games. This is much more egregious than what Crabtree and Talib did, in my opinion. So I would have suspended Gronkowski 3 games, expecting it to come back down to 2.
Very interesting. Well, as for the players' perspective, Super Bowl champion Isaac Bruce stopped by our studios recently. He gave his thoughts on how he handled dirty hits on the field.
I mean, there were some shots where I probably thrown or, cutting the guy when the run's going the opposite way. I mean, it would be considered dirty, but I'm trying to keep it cool. It's all in between the whistles. And if he gets hurt, I'm not trying to hurt him, but if he does, so be it.
And on that, Peter King of the MMQB tweeted, "A couple of years ago, I wrote the players need to police themselves. There's only so much rule makers can do. I was ridiculed, maybe rightfully, but I still believe that." We now welcome in his colleague from the MMQB, Jenny Varentes. Jenny, is he right? Is it on the players to prevent things like we saw last night from the Steelers and Bengals?
I think you have to incentivize it as much as possible. I mean, fines and suspensions go toward that, but I really think the next step for the NFL is to, have ejections during the game for targeting, like college football does. I mean, I know it's obviously sometimes these things are judgment calls. They happen very quickly, but I think asking players to police themselves is something that seems to be, more possible over time as players are more aware of the long-term ramifications and, the dangers of the game of football. The younger generation of players does seem to be a little bit more aware, but I do think it's just so hard, to ask players to do that without some kind of incentivization. And so I think the ultimate thing is if you lead with your helmet. If you, make a dirty hit, then you are ejected from this particular game that we're battling in right now. And that's the greatest reason that players would choose to not do those hits, because they don't want to miss the rest of the game.
Certainly, we're keeping our eye on that story, but let's move on because, Jenny, you are embedded with the Philadelphia Eagles on this West Coast swing. And after their loss in Seattle, maybe the air of invincibility has taken a bit of a hit. Are the Eagles more vulnerable than we thought?
So it really puts a lot more pressure on this game in LA, I think, because, going into this West Coast swing, it was sort of like, hey, if they go 1-1, that would be perfectly acceptable, right? They had been on such a streak. They'd won so many games. They were in great playoff position. They're playing two tough opponents on the road. Going 1-1 is perfectly okay. But when you lose the second one, that obviously puts more pressure, or you lose the first one, it puts more pressure to win the second one. And so, I think what happened was they went into a tough Seattle environment. They made a lot of mistakes. Jason Kelce, the center, said after the game, it wasn't like we were by far the worst team. And I think that's true. I think that they hurt themselves. There was that fumble on the goal line. There were some, miscommunications in coverage on some defensive plays. They had a chance to corral Russell Wilson. They didn't quite get him down. Those are problems a lot of teams have when facing the Seahawks. So, I think that certainly there is a lot into this game because it's going to be one that has ramifications for not only how good the Eagles can be, but also playoff positioning when it comes to January. But they're still a very good team. They just ran into a good Seattle team last week and perhaps weren't quite as, some of those wins had been so easy the weeks before. And I think this was a reminder of how tough the competition is in the NFC.
Obviously, the crowd won't be as big of a factor when they play the Rams, but what are the Eagles going to change after suffering this loss to Seattle?
So Doug Peterson said his main, change would be in messaging. And both he and a lot of players after the game said they'd had not the best week of practice leading up to the game, not the best preparation. What does that mean? It sounded like, a lot of the mistakes that are showing up in games, like the turnovers, like the penalties, were also showing up first on the practice field. And so when you hear veteran guys say, and pretty much every veteran guy in that locker room on Sunday night said some form of, we need to practice better, we need to prepare better. So clearly that was the message coming from the head coach. So I think that as they're in Los Angeles, it's sort of an interesting environment, right? It could go one of two ways. It could be sort of disorienting, distracting. You're recreating your training facility out here in California, or it could have the effect of like, hey, we're bunkered down together. Let's go back to the same kind of preparation, the same kind of details in practice and in the meeting room that got us to this point. And it sounds like the Eagles are really making a concerted effort to make sure that's the message this week.
Obviously, the Eagles lead the NFC East. Before the season, some people thought it might be the Giants. Not the case. The Giants cleaned house yesterday, firing coach Ben McAdoo, GM Jerry Reese. They also are going back to Eli Manning, making the decision to bench him look even more like a fiasco. Owner John Mara said the Eli benching didn't factor into the firings. Do you buy that?
Well, I think there was just so much backlash. I think it wasn't handled exactly the way John Mara wanted to handle it. Now, he did say, I take credit. I signed off on this. I was the one who also said, let's try to take a look at these other quarterbacks. And certainly at any point in time, John Mara could have stepped in and sort of, shut the whole thing down. But I think ultimately the way it was handled, the way it was presented to Eli, and I think the fan backlash from former players as well, I think that was, ultimately really the tide was a lot higher than, I think John Mara probably anticipated. And when they have 3 or 4 of their last games or home games coming up, I think they just knew that, the timing of it, let's make the move now. We're going to make the move anyway. But really, there were a lot of factors in this, right? There are a lot of factors in the roster. That's on Jerry Reese. There's a lot of factors in McAdoo's firing that kind of built up over time. There were player walkouts, there were player suspensions, there were anonymous quotes from players griping about the coach. So this was something that was building for a long time. I think the Eli benching just sort of brought everything to a head and sort of forced ownership's hands to make the move now. But over the last few weeks, it became clear that this was going to be a move they were going to make regardless.
Jenny, thank you. Appreciate your perspective as always. Now, LaVar Ball, he's back in the news, isn't he always? After pulling his son LiAngelo out of UCLA, LaVar disagreed with the school's indefinite suspension for the shoplifting incident in China, claiming the discipline was too harsh. He's now exploring, quote, other options for LiAngelo. Here's what he told the Today Show.
We only went to UCLA one and done, to play basketball. I'm going to get Jello in shape. I'm going to work him out. We're going to do some other things, and he's going to be headed to the NBA.
I feel like we ask this every couple of weeks, but this time, has LaVar gone too far?
Listen, LaVar deserves a lot of criticism for a lot of things. This is not one place where I will criticize him. I don't believe that LiAngelo, or anyone for that matter, should be forced to participate in a system that is basically meaningless if you have no interest in going to school. If you are only using college to be there for 7 months and then get yourself ready for the NBA draft, now doesn't that really make a sham and a mockery of college anyway? So why should he be forced to participate in that system? And let's be honest, do we ever question or care about the schooling for Kristaps Porzingis and Dario Saric and Ricky Rubio and going back to, Manu Ginobili? It doesn't matter. The European players we never even questioned. So if LiAngelo wants to go over to Europe and play for a year or two and then come back to the NBA, who are we to say that that's wrong?
It always seems like a very convenient argument, right? Because out of one side of the mouth, people are saying the NCAA system is a sham and we need to fix it and change it. And then something like this can happen. Out the other side, they say, but what about his education? So that aspect of it doesn't bother me at all. And it's up to them to decide what is the best course of action. Maybe playing overseas is. The questionable comments is the one about the NBA, because LiAngelo is not projected to be at that level like Lonzo was. So there's going to have to be a lot of work done to get him there. Now, I will say this for LaVar. Much of what he's done has worked out in his favor, so maybe he's thinking in different terms about the money he could bring in to Big Baller Brand, or how he can capitalize on this hot moment he's having to, bring his finances up to help all of his family. As far as the NBA goes, it does seem a little far-fetched, though.
But here's the thing. If LiAngelo doesn't make it to the NBA, there's nothing that's preventing him from going back to school as a regular student. He can live a life. He can go do whatever he wants to do. And if he has a little bit of a nest egg of money that he's made playing in Europe, well, maybe that gives him a little bit of a foot forward and a step forward over other people who, graduate college with 6 figures of debt. There are a lot of different ways to go about doing this. And just because we have this system right now where you have a one and done system if you want to go to the NBA, or that college is the only way really to get yourself to the pros, doesn't mean it always needs to be that way.
Sure, and learning to be a professional, learning to adapt in a new environment, those things you could argue are just as beneficial, if not more so, than what was going to be sort of a, here today, gone tomorrow deal at UCLA.
Well, the other thing, though, that where I will criticize LaVar, though, is for going out and saying, suspending him from one game or suspending him for 4 years or whatever is the same punishment. It's not. It is not UCLA's fault that LiAngelo and 2 other guys walked into a Gucci store or whatever it was and stole some sunglasses. I mean, you have to have a little personal accountability here. Does that mean I think he needs to stay at UCLA and ride the bench for a year? No, he can do whatever he wants. But there has to be some accountability. You cannot blame this on the school for the boneheaded decision that your son made.
The one part that stood out to me that was a little bit taken aback by, apparently they took away their meal cards. That just seems out of the realm of what's going on. I get suspending them from the team. And perhaps LaVar he didn't quite articulate this, but perhaps he's saying, hey, they've already been suspended a period of time. They already suffered the consequences of being humiliated publicly, had to be detained in China. When is enough enough? Now you're being heavy-handed to prove a point.
Interesting. Meanwhile, make what you will about the timing here, but Monday, the LA Lakers announced they are going to more rigorously endorse their policy that no longer allows the media to congregate, interview players, families, agents, associates of players after games. It's being called the Lavar Ball rule. What does this announcement mean to you, Robin?
I don't know. We have LaVar Ball's comments on this, and we have his comments on everything else.
Good Morning America's probably got him next.
What it means to me is, for the first time, maybe the Lakers are going, oh yeah, this could be a thing for us. When going into the draft, they sort of ignored it and said that's not going to factor in. But this comes fairly close to the heels of LaVar saying that Luke Walton and the Lakers coaching staff has not coached Lonzo the right way. They've been too soft on him and all that. So maybe the Lakers are trying to figure out a way to stop this before it becomes an ongoing saga for them.
Okay. What I think is this is just another attempt to silence LaVar, which how many times do we have to understand that these attempts are futile. He's going to find a microphone. It doesn't matter where the media congregates or who's where or where you're sitting. The geography on this doesn't matter. LaVar is going to be able to say whatever he wants. Now, I had proposed this after the Lakers drafted Lonzo second overall. What I thought was going to be a good solution here is that if the Lakers hired LaVar Ball, well, then they'd be his boss, and maybe then they could dictate what he could say or not say. Doesn't seem like the Lakers are taking my advice on that one. So for now, it doesn't really matter. I mean, LaVar has proven that he's got a platform. He's on the Today Show, for crying out loud, and CNN. This is beyond sports now. LaVar's a thing in society. So if they ever thought he was going to be, silent, or if he was not going to talk to the media, or he was going to play by their rules at all, they were sorely mistaken.
Well, that's part of his appeal, and where people have said he's been victorious is being his own boss and creating his own lane. Meanwhile, the Heisman Trophy finalists were announced as last year's winner, Louisville's Lamar Jackson, Stanford running back Bryce Love, and Oklahoma's Baker Mayfield were invited to the ceremony in New York. Did they get it right?
Sure, I think so. And we think that Mayfield is probably going to be the very, very clear favorite here. I mean, he completed 71% of his passes this year. That's pretty amazing. The team's 12-1. I mean, they're in the semifinal, 41 touchdown passes, the second best in the nation. In the last 4 games, he's had 13 TDs with 0 interceptions. I guess I would say the one thing that I'm just very impressed by is the fact that Bryce Love, the running back for Stanford, has been putting up all these incredible numbers on an ankle that's not 100%. I mean, he's missed games. This is amazing that he would be a finalist, even though we're not seeing him at his full capability. So I would say tip of the cap to him without a doubt. And then for Lamar Jackson, amazing. The numbers are there. I just don't think they're going to give it to him 2 years in a row.
Yeah, he probably won't win it 2 years in a row. They'll hold the team's record against him, but maybe we should be showing Lamar Jackson a little bit more love for what he's done in his college career.
Okay, turning to the Golden State Warriors now. Steph Curry left the Warriors' comeback win over the Pelicans right after he rolled his ankle. Now, x-rays were negative, but after the game, Klay Thompson said this.
Is there a cloud over this thing at all with Steph crutching out? He had the bad ankle sprain late.
It's not good, but hopefully it'll be all right in time. There's no need to rush him back, but it's definitely not good.
Klay Thompson says it's not good. Can the Warriors maintain their dominance, Robin, if Steph Curry misses an extended period of time?
Absolutely not. Not while he's out. The Warriors need Steph Curry to be the Warriors for as many other great players as they have. For instance, Durant missed a big chunk last year. They didn't miss a beat. But with Curry, there's a lot of aspects to why they need him. They don't have anyone else like him, and he is unlike anyone else really ever. He does some of that stuff out on the court where he'll pull up from where he pulls up from 35 feet, and you go, that's not fair. And defensive have had to adapt to that. So defenses have to play the Warriors unlike they do other teams where they're picking Steph up at darn near half court, whether that's trapping him to get the ball out of his hands or just to try and get a hand in his face so he doesn't shoot the ball comfortably from there. And that creates a gravity. In the finals when Durant went off, I think one thing that wasn't pointed out enough when people were talking about him being the MVP of that series, he's getting one-on-one matchups. So Steph is getting double-teamed, get the ball out of his hands, it kicks over to KD, and he's got Kevin Love one-on-one on a switch. That's food for Kevin Durant right there. Without Steph Curry in that mix, those things go away, and it makes the Warriors much more pedestrian.
I mean, I agree with you, but I'll just echo the sentiment of Steve Kerr, the coach of the Warriors, who recently, a Bill Simmons podcast, basically said, yes, the reason why we are what we are is because of Steph Curry. And he wasn't saying that to throw shade to the rest of his team, but he was just acknowledging just everything that you said, how much Steph is the gravitational pull of this team and just how much he makes it easier for everyone else. I'll say this, we talk a lot about MVP races, especially off air. This is one of our favorite things to talk about in the newsroom. But there's still a lot of time here. If Steph Curry does end up missing, significant amounts of the season, maybe this is a moment for Kevin Durant, right? He has been looking for something to change his narrative for as long as ever since he made the announcement.
He better stop getting himself ejected if that's the case.
Okay, well, that's the thing, right? I think he's kind of searching for something this year, especially after he admits that he was so embarrassed when he was tweeting from the third account. Sort of had these very highs in his career, but also had some lows. And we know that he's a little sensitive to sort of how he's perceived. If he can really take over while Steph is battling and nursing this ankle injury, I think that really does finally start to change the perception of Kevin Durant, that he's just the guy who sort of was the cherry on top of the sundae.
It's made the season very interesting, of course, with the Rockets playing as well as they are in the West. In the East, the team that was supposed to meet the Warriors, or has the last several years, the Cleveland Cavaliers, their win streak now stands at 12 after they knocked off the Bulls Monday night, 113-91. After early season struggles, the team is rolling, albeit they haven't exactly been running through the titans of the league.
No.
Does this level of play make for some difficult lineup decisions for Tyronn Lue when Isaiah Thomas, Tristan Thompson, and Derrick Rose return?
I think so. This is, I think, where we're going to see how good of a coach Tyronn Lue really is. And this is very difficult because you're going to have not only Isaiah Thomas and Tristan Thompson coming back, but I think at some point you have to start cutting down and curtailing LeBron's minutes. It's too much. I mean, I know that he's been phenomenal in his 15th season. It seems like he's playing better than ever. But if you are serious about, another finals appearance and going deep into the postseason, I mean, you have to be able to mitigate this. This is what Greg Popovich, I felt like, did so well and has done so well, especially toward the end of Tim Duncan's career and as more of his superstars age. And I'm not saying LeBron is at that point yet, but you have a lot of pieces you have to work in. It's going to come at a time where if you are trailing in a game, right, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. LeBron's instincts are going to kick in, and he's going to just try to win that game for you down the stretch. So now you just postpone. How do you really find chemistry when you're in crunch time at the end of games with all these new pieces?
Well, they figured out their rotations, right? Dwayne Wade is flourishing in his role as the leader of the bench unit, and they've had success with him and Jeff Green coming off the bench there. But it is something to tackle. And one, Derrick Rose should not play another meaningful minute for the Cavs all season. So that should be the decision right there. When it comes to the other two guys, it's a little bit dicier. Now, Isaiah Thomas is such an upgrade at the point guard position that it will only help the Cavs ultimately. They're starting Jose Calderon right now. The only issue there, I think, is at the end of games, LeBron's been so dominant. Yeah. Does he defer to Isaiah to get him going? And does that, cause the Cavs to have a little bit of a hiccup there? But overall, he'll help. The most interesting one to me is Tristan Thompson, because he's been a very valuable player for the Cavs over the years, crashing the offensive boards, playing defense, and all that. But most of their success has come with stretch fives. Kevin Love is playing the center position. Channing Frye is playing big minutes off the bench at the center position, could shoot the ball. Tristan Thompson can't do that. So does his return mess up a little bit of what their identity has become?
Very interesting. The comments today are just so money. I'm just going to read a few. Lamont saying Barkley should be in the mix for Heisman. Saquon Barkley really didn't have the numbers after a fantastic September. How about Sean, who says Baker Mayfield to the Giants? That would make things really interesting here around New York. And Armando says toothpicks for ankles with Steph Curry.
Come on, all that work,
in a while.
all that work he did to keep himself healthy. It's been years since this really happened.
And Rob, who just says dilly dilly. Well, Robin, exciting today. Very exciting for Sports Illustrated. We have announced our prestigious Sportsperson of the Year award. This year, SI is Houston Strong, honoring J.J. Watt and Jose Altuve for their efforts in not only helping to rebuild the area impacted by Hurricane Harvey, but lifting the spirits of an entire city as well. Watch this.
Houston to me is it's the biggest small city in the world. For some reason it feels like everybody knows everybody and everybody's willing to help each other out. And obviously during the hurricane we saw the greatest example of that. When I first started with the goal of $200,000, by the time we got up to $37 million, obviously the plan had to change. I didn't anticipate raising that much money. I think it just speaks volumes to the good in people and the good in humanity that there is out there.
A lot of our fans back here in Houston were getting hit really hard by the hurricane. They were suffering, and since the hurricane until the last game of the World Series, we were thinking about that.
Music? I listen to anything. Whatever they listen to, they won the World Series. It was incredible. Sitting there and watching the whole playoffs and watching them, they helped lift the city up. They helped take everybody's mind off of what was going on. And they gave us all something to smile about and something to cheer about. And I think that this city and I will forever be grateful for that.
Perfect. I'll do it.
Robin, it really is one of the best things that Sports Illustrated does, and I really can't think of two more deserving people who embody just everything that Houston has had to go through, what they're still going through, but just that hope, you know, that they will make it through this really dark time, and being led by guys like J.J. Watt and Jose Altuve, it's great.
I'm not the first person to say something like this, but we spend a lot of time focusing on negative aspects of sports or what an athlete might do, some transgressions. That sometimes the positivity gets lost, so it's nice to have a forum like this to honor guys who did use their platform to try and make something positive out of what was a tragedy.
Yeah, I mean, J.J. Watt helping to raise and spearheading raising $37 million and starting to give a lot of that money back to the people of Houston, and of course what Jose Altuve has done, and just being the American League MVP, and just what Houston was able to do in this time when they had this awful tragedy. The franchise wins its first ever World Series. I mean, that was something that really lifted everyone up.
And if sports do provide an escape for people, or are the things that they can look to take them out of some bad moments, fortunately, that's happened for Houston with the contributions of Watt, with the Astros winning the World Series, and with really the way the Rockets are rolling right now.
Yeah, that's a good point. Houston, H-Town strong. All right, thanks so much for watching, guys. We'll be back tomorrow at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time. Until then, stick with SI.com for all the latest news and headlines, and you can follow us on Twitter. That's where we'll be posting clips from today's show. Have a good one.